Admit.
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Oh, nope. Can you hear me now?
Mhm.
I don't know why she can't hear me.
Now, why can't I get this to unmute?
That's
Hey,
just.
Brian, can you give me a hand? Got it. I'm trying to. Okay, I got to unmute. He's okay. I can't unmute him. Okay. Ask to unmute. I think you're muted. Ask to unmute. There we go.
Okay, so can you hear me now? You
Nope, still can't hear you.
can't hear me.
Hmm.
What are you doing this
Oh, it's
morning?
on there. Okay. Admit you.
Muted.
Let's see. Guest.
Hmm? Audio settings.
Nope.
I unmuted myself. Audio settings.
Bunny's there.
Hello, hello, hello. Yes. Media control.
I should be able to hear you.
I'm talking. Can you hear me? No?
Yeah.
My speaker's on.
Rennie,
Hi,
you can hear
Rennie.
me?
Hi, Dee. I can hear Rita. I can
Wait a
hear
minute.
Dee.
Wait a minute. Yeah, I don't know why I can't hear you guys. Choose one. Okay.
Also,
hang
it's on her end, but Rennie, you can hear me though, right?
It's on.
Okay.
My volume's up. Hmm.
But Rennie, you
There
can
we
hear me
go.
though, right?
On. I can hear you now. My volume's up. Can you guys hear each other? Okay. Very good.
So, Dee, you can hear me now?
I can hear you.
There we go.
We're going. I can hear you now.
The only thing is there's an echo though.
Can you guys hear each other? Okay. Yes.
Very good. Dee, you can hear me now?
I can hear you. Here we go. We're going.
Yeah. Dee, you're causing an echo somehow.
Guys hear each other? Yes. Okay. Yes. Very good.
You can hear me now?
I can hear you. Here we go.
We're hearing, I think we're hearing the live stream.
Yep, we're on the live stream. Yes.
No, but we're hearing it. So it's like, it's repeating. I think we're hearing the live stream.
Yep, we're on the live stream. Yes.
No, but we're hearing it. So it's like, it's repeating. I think we're hearing the live stream.
Yep, we're on the live stream. Yes.
No, but we're hearing it. So it's like, it's repeating. I think we're hearing the live stream.
Yep, we're on the live stream. Yes.
You're hearing it. So it's like, it's repeating.
Okay, so we're recording, guys. 6:30. Okay, so we're recording, guys.
Dee, can you turn off, can you mute yourself?
I will.
Because I think that'll help with the repeating. There we go.
Okay, good. Okay. So who are we waiting on? Don Tolliman?
Yeah, we got a note from Michelle Hirsch saying she wasn't going to be able to make it.
Right. Right, so we'll a couple more minutes to see if Don's going to join us.
I'll be right back.
Hi, Alan.
Hello.
I see John is here. I'm just waiting on one more committee member and then we can get started. Just a few more minutes.
I just admitted Dawn, so.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. Oh, I see Dean is here too. Okay.
I just admitted Dawn, so.
Hi, guys.
Hello. All right, so it just sounds like there's going to be an echo or a delay coming from your side. Okay. But if you mute yourself, I think we'll be okay. Okay. All right. Looks like everybody's here, so we can go ahead and get started. All right. Thank you for joining the City of Kingston's Common Council at our Laws and Rules Committee meeting. Today is September 29th, 2021. Before we begin, we would like to go over a few guidelines to help us navigate the system as efficiently and respectfully as possible. We ask that members of the public and press remain muted and off camera for the length of the meeting. The moderator for tonight is Deputy City Clerk Dee Sills, and she reserves the right to mute anyone who unmutes themselves. Council members and city staff will control their own mute buttons. Good practice would be to mute yourself if you are not speaking to avoid background noise and feedback. If a council member or staff wishes to speak, they will raise their hands. I will call on members by stating their name clearly for our audio listeners. All of our meetings are recorded. Both video and written transcriptions will be made available to the public on the city's website. Although we will not have public speaking tonight, you can sign up to speak at our monthly council meetings. Please email Elisa Tinty who is the city clerk, to sign up by noon the day of the meeting, or you can submit written comment for the record by the same deadline. The email address is emtinty@kingston-newyork.gov. You can also drop comments off at the box located outside the side door of City Hall. We also encourage you to reach out to committee chairs or your ward's representative at any time. Deputy City Clerk Dee Sills is the moderator for tonight's meeting. She has the right to lock and pause the meeting to eject anyone who has behaved inappropriately. And lastly, at tonight's meeting, we have in attendance, besides myself, Alderwoman Rita Worthington, who is sitting on behalf of Alderman Jeffrey Ventura Morel, who is the chair of the Laws and Rules Committee. We also have Majority Leader Rennie Scott Childress in attendance. We have Alderman Don Tommerman, Alderman Patrick O'Reilly. We have Alan Nace. I see City Engineer John Schulteis. And please forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong. Non-committee members and just those in attendance. Is it Ashanae Emmanuel? I see Brianna. Dan Gardenstein is in, Assistant Court Counsel. Annie Costello, Susan Hirth, Kevin Corte, who's the Housing Director. And we have a couple of people on the phone, but I don't have their names available to me. And with that, we will call the meeting to order at 6:36. And so on our agenda, first on our agenda, we have an update from the Ethics Board. And Alan Nace is in attendance, so I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Worthington, and thank you to the committee members for inviting us in the Ethics Board and to present to you today some of the concerns and recommendations that we've developed over a period of time. In April of 21 this year, we submitted a request for a review and consideration for a revision of the Code of Ethics. And we were scheduled to present at that body, but we were delayed because 2 board members left the Ethics Commission. We now have, and they had approved the presentation, but we no longer had a quorum. They were replaced by new members, and it now consists of myself, Michael Decker, Charlotte Adamus, and Barbara Sarah, and there is an open seat, just so everyone knows where it's at. And they've also approved this. So anyway, we want to submit for consideration that it's the recommendation of the City of Kingston Ethics Board that the Common Council review and consider revision of the code to clarify the intent of use, interpretation of the Code of Ethics. And we're speaking about Chapter 49. And there's multiple reasons for the request. And I'm going to point out that of the 5 members, 3 are recommended by the council and 2 are from the mayor. And it's a mayoral board, so he appoints them all, but he gets those 3 recommendations. So some of the reasons for us, and we thought it important to explain to you some of the areas that we struggled with and that we would ask you to consider when you review the code. Is one of the examples to start with is there's a term in there called action, and it brought to question what constitutes an action. Is it the same or different from a proposal? Is a public statement an action? It's suggested that the Common Council review and determine the parameters desired. Expanding the verbiage would allow a more broad interpretation of the code. However, a word of caution, that expansion would also open up opportunities for increased complaints and lower the bar for the consideration of ethical violations. Legal counsel, including our outside legal counsel, has offered that an action by a public official is only met when a person has the ability to carry out that act. And our outside attorney took it to a Supreme Court ruling that basically what it says is if another party has the authority to prove that act and not the individual proposing it, then it's not an action. So if a public official or an elected official, anyone involved here were to say something, unless they have the ability to actually enact it, it doesn't count as an action, although a reasonable person may think that it does. the other is the financial benefit. The code says that the term limits the actions to those that receive a financial benefit. So if no action and or no financial benefit, there's no allowance for determination of an ethical violation. And this comes up because we've been contacted by people who said, well, wouldn't that be an ethical violation? And there's a difference between what, a neighbor or a person on the street may interpret it to be and what the law allows it to be. And since you are the body that writes that code, we thought everybody should be aware of that. Without it, there could be situations where there's no ethical violation, but there is a case of a discrimination, problems with work conditions, or other determinants that could come in.
Alan, can I ask you to give an example?
Yeah, you can ask. I can't be specific as to cases that have occurred. However, if, and I don't know what your authority and roles are, but if you were to propose tonight that something that would benefit you or your family, you were going to put in place. If you had the ability to put that into place, whether it was a position or a proposal that was before the council, if you were to do that and have the ability to put it into place, it would be an ethical violation. Since you're part of the council and you don't have that ability to do that, it makes your action by a reasonable person not be considered an action by a public official. I don't know if that.
Let me see if I can understand. So I own an event venue called Senate Garage. So if I propose something that said, hey, I propose that monthly meetings be held at Senate Garage for a fee. So therefore I would benefit from that.
Mhm.
And therefore that would be unethical.
It may be unethical, but it may not be a violation of the code because you couldn't enact that on your own.
Okay, so what are you getting at then?
Well, that we would like you to review and consider revision or not of the code to reflect what you actually want it to mean. We found out about the issues with the term action when we were looking into some cases, and the outside attorney started talking about Supreme Court decisions on where they made a determination that of what constitutes an action by a public official. And it was very different than what the general public would interpret as an action. So this code is your code. You guys wrote it, or you guys can revise it or not. It could be exactly what you want it to be, or you could revise it to reflect what you want it to reflect.
So can I ask a question, please?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, just for my own clarification. So are you saying that an ethical violation could be committed, but as long as it's not carried out, it's not classified as an action?
Well, each case is a little different and it has to be looked at independently. However, it's something like that. An action, if you were a person who could create positions and you wanted to create a position for a family member, significant other, or a son, daughter, cousin, whatever, and you say you're going to do that, unless you can implement that, it's not considered an action by a public official. So the way the code is written, if it's not an action,
There's no.
there's no ethical violation.
Well,
Although a regular person, a reasonable person may view it differently.
right.
And the advice on the attorney side was that we don't have to follow that. However, to not follow that would expose us, the board, and the city to legal action. So just something to look at there. And the other part, the second part of that is with the financial benefit. So if you could look at that. And I had a hypothetical here that if an officer, a department head, or someone acts in a manner that is out of the accepted standards and proposes that that plan be implemented, but he doesn't have the authority to make changes, or the body that has the authority doesn't approve implementing the proposed changes, there would be no action and no financial gain possible. So unless you were to propose it and it come to fruition, there's no action. And that's something that didn't sit well with some members of the board when we discussed it, and it didn't fit with the public perception as it was relayed to us. The complaints that are presented to the ethics board appear to be based more on what a reasonable person may consider a violation of ethics. However, the code as it's written doesn't necessarily reflect that. So we would recommend that the review of the code be conducted, and a revision, if there is one, reflect the intent of the community and the intent of the Common Council, and or this committee or whatever committee would be doing the review and revision. And again, a word of caution is revisions may allow interpretation of the code based on a reasonable interpretation, but they would also open up additional individuals and situations to ethical jeopardy. And so we have to be I would suggest being real careful with that. Another recommendation that came was that it be clearly spelled out in relation to the inclusion of the whistleblower clause. People have been hesitant to speak to us and or to even respond when they were concerned about whether or not they would be protected under that. And the code doesn't directly speak to it. Separately, we ran into some major issues. And it was suggested by the board unanimously that there be an automatic approval for the board, by approval of the board, for the chair to engage outside legal counsel in any case where the ethics board determines there's a conflict of interest with the use of the corporation counsel. And we use corporation counsel as our legal advisors. But so too do they represent the mayor and the common council and the city. So when that conflict exists, it creates some problems. And an example could be that the present allowance provides this relief if corporation.
Alan, we lost you. We lost the sound. Can anyone else hear him?
However, if the alderman at large is involved in a complaint in some way, then there are no other remedies listed. But a reasonable person, there's that reasonable person again, might think that you could go to the majority leader. That would be the obvious next step, one would assume, in the line. Unless, of course, the majority leader was involved in a complaint. And so we were thinking, well, then we would go to the minority leader. And that doesn't exist. So we would ask that the council consider approving at least an exploratory amount so that council could be engaged. And the proposed remedy would allow the ethics board to act on their judgment and eliminate those mentioned possible conflicts and obstacles and result in a quicker resolution of complaints. And in that hypothetical case, it could take months to get through that process. Another suggestion was that the annual financial disclosures, 49-4, be reviewed.
Take months.
I'm sorry? And considered for revision. There were complaints that there were questions that weren't really relevant and that delved into people's finances that did not apply to the city and really didn't necessarily relate to conflicts of interest. And then the others were defining relationships, and should they include, they do not include the terminology of significant others, and should they? And if so, how would that be determined? And so I want to tell you that the board as a whole respects and is honored to be entrusted with what we feel are important and serious responsibilities, because ethical complaints impact, if you're accused of something, it can have a major impact on you. People's anxieties are up in general. The ones that speak with me tell me that they've been anxious and unable to sleep, and that shouldn't, that isn't the goal. So our goal is to hopefully educate individuals and remedy situations prior to the breach of ethics, and we want to continue to work towards that goal. So one of our recommendations is that there be an in-depth training on ethics that occurs at employment orientation or at the point of engagement by officials, and that there be an update on an annual basis. And this may aid in accomplishing the goals of an increased awareness of ethics and ethical violations, and avoiding entanglement and ethical concerns for those individuals serving our community. It may also result in a reduction in ethical complaints filed that don't rise to the level of meeting an ethical violation. In addition, we hear complaints and determine if a complaint meets the criteria set forth in the code, and if so, then a hearing or investigation may occur. As we conduct the investigation, lots of times questions arise, and so because of that, we would request a review and a revision where needed, or where you think it's needed, and a clarification of what you desire the code to be and to accomplish. So that's the end of that. Were there any concerns or questions or?
Alderman Renee Scott Childress.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Alan, for being here and for all the work that you're doing on the ethics board, and for all the work that you all have put into thinking through these issues. So I'm wondering, I'm kind of hearing two things, and I'm asking for a little direction here. One is, it sounds like you're asking for the common council or some sub body of the council to do a review of the ethics code. And then the thing that I'm wondering about is the document that you've given us, are those suggested changes, or are those merely directions to look at?
The review and consideration for revision is a suggestion. The examples given are some of the obstacles some of the concerns we've run into, and seeking clarification on what it is, if you were to revise it, what it would be. And in the case of the action, an action that results in a financial benefit, if it has to meet that term action by a public official, or would it be what a reasonable person might consider an ethical violation, rather than a public official's action? And I'm not suggesting that you do it either way. These are just areas of contention that we've had on multiple occasions. And getting, the opinion of us by some people in the community who are looking at it from what a reasonable person might suspect it is, and not agreeing that they're not hearing about any ethical violations being found or limited. Our goal is not to find ethical violations. We really would like to have people educated and avoid them, and to be seen more as educators than punishers. We've had over the past 2 years, and I've been on for a number of years, but over the past 2 years, we've had an abundance of complaints, and some fairly complicated, and some not, but some were very complicated. And the one that we had to go to outside counsel, and he had to review the Supreme Court. And I said, we're a small city ethics board. Here we are talking Supreme Court. And is that what you want? And that's fine if that is but there are restrictions that come with that and limitations. And so, to ask you guys who are entrusted leadership of the city to determine what it is, what's the purpose of the code, and what do you want to do with it? Do you want it to be as it is, and that's fine, or do you want it to be what a person on the street might consider it, or somewhere in between?
Anyone have any other questions? Alderman O'Reilly?
Yeah, hi, Patrick O'Reilly. Thanks for being here, and appreciate your time and obviously effort. I mean, I can tell you've done your homework on this. I do have a few questions. You said you sought outside counsel, and I'll give you my questions and you can answer them. Who is that outside counsel? The second one is, you said you use the common counsel for your legal advice? Is that did the council? Did the city attorneys help you devise this plan that you're talking about, or suggestions that you're talking about? That's my two questions right now.
Okay. We don't use common counsel for legal advice, but it's corporation counsel, if I misspoke.
Corporation counsel, I'm sorry.
And they've advised us on many of our cases and are aware of some of these issues and concerns. And we didn't ask for their guidance on asking for a review, because that falls to the ethics board. The outside counsel I'm trying to remember his name. It was an attorney out of New York. Not Steven Spielberg. It's Stephen Leventhal from Leventhal, Mulaney, and Blinkoff.
And how did you find that counsel?
Well, once we got approval to seek outside counsel, we had it was different board members at that time. There were a couple.
Who did you get approval from?
We got approval from the alderman at large. We had we exhausted that situation that I had mentioned, and there was no one to get approval from in the list. So as an ethics board, we discussed it and said, well, what do we do? And there was nowhere to get it. And the alderman at large, she offered, or we asked her if she could approve it, and she said she could approve it, but she couldn't be involved in deciding which attorney to use. So we got that approval, and our secretary had contacted the lawyer. We were talking with two different lawyers, and the board's decision was to go with Mr. Leventhal because this is his area of expertise. This is what he does.
All right, thank you. And are you seeking, in your proposal here tonight, are you seeking more money for outside counsel?
No. Just that when situations like this arise and there's no ability to get through the process, or the process isn't defined enough to allow that we, with the approval of the full board, are able to access, even on a limited basis, outside counsel to get some advice.
Are you requesting that tonight?
Yes.
You are requesting that.
Yes.
Do you have any dollar amounts?
There's $10,000 in the code that's budgeted. But we would have to follow that, get an approval from the mayor or the alderman at large. And we would still want to do that. I think we would still want to do that, except in cases where there are obstacles. And in this past year, we had those obstacles as well as COVID. So things were harder to navigate. And it took a long time to go through the process and say, we can't really turn anywhere. There's no one to ask, for approval, following what's listed in the code. So what we're asking for in those cases, that the board be able to spend half of whatever the allowance is, up to $5,000. But the dollar amount doesn't really matter, just so that we could start a process and not be paralyzed, basically.
All right, so let me get this straight. So you want to be able to access $5,000 worth of attorney's fees without approval from the mayor or the council. Is that correct?
In cases where the mayor or the council are part of the complaint process, and therefore we can't use them. We can't get approval from them.
So just $5,000 is what you want?
Yes. And ideally never use it, but.
Well, you want to have the freedom to use that 5,000 in case there's an ethical violation in the mayor's office or in the council.
Right, or a complaint. So if the mayor files an ethical complaint against the council, or the council against the mayor, they're both involved in that.
Right.
And
your hands are tied unless you get that money?
Right.
Now let me ask you again. You in the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned how people are appointed to the board. Could you go through that one more time?
Yes. The board documented to consist of 5 members. And there's some guidance on that. No more than 2 from any one political party. And of the 5, it's a mayoral board or a city board, so they're all appointed, I guess, by the mayor. But the recommendations, the mayor picks 2 of them, and the recommendations for the other 3 come from the mayor, or come from, Common Council.
Okay, so it's just purely recommendation. The mayor doesn't have to take those recommendations, right? He can not take those recommendations. Is that correct?
I don't believe he's not ever taken them, but I
I'm
don't
just
know.
saying it's possible that he doesn't have to take those recommendations, right?
I don't know. That would be for.
That's in the charter, yeah.
That would be for you guys to figure out if he must do it or not.
Okay, so he's got two that he can put on, and he's got recommendations from the council on 3, which he may or may not be able to just put his own people on, correct? So he may or may not be able to put 5 people on a 5-person board ethics committee. Is that correct?
I don't believe that is correct. I believe the way it's termed is he receives the recommendations for 3 of those members from Common Council. So my interpretation, and I'm not the legal counsel, but would be that he would have to get 3 of the people from the Common Council, and if he objected to one of them, then they could replace it, I would assume, but I'm not sure.
Is Mr.
Not part of that
Gartenstein on?
process.
Mr. Gartenstein, do you know whether those 3 recommendations have to be put on, or is it just, or the mayor can put on whoever he wants? Mr.
Dan,
Gartenstein?
unmute yourself, please.
I have the ethics code open on my phone. I'm in the process of reviewing it. I certainly can let you know in a minute. There are a couple of things in the code that, need to be clarified in terms of what Alan was just talking about. The code actually speaks about the ethics board entering into a retainer agreement with outside counsel, and then basically says the retainer agreement has to be approved by A, B, C, or D. The issue here in terms of the ethics board, and we discussed this when the code was initially adopted, someone has to be authorized to execute the retainer agreement, and that person has to be a city official with authority to bind the city. So the ethics board itself can't do that. It has to be someone in the chain of command within city government, whether it be the mayor, whether it be the alderman at large. Conceivably, it could be the comptroller, but it has to comply with procurement rules. And certainly the ethics board commission members don't have the authority to execute a retainer and bind the city to expend funds. The ethics legislation has always included a $10,000 allocation for the purpose of the ethics board retaining outside counsel. The problem is that the council has never budgeted that money since the time that the ethics legislation was adopted. So it's already in the code. You've all just never given it to it.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting. So Dan, what about my other question?
I am in the process of looking for it in the ethics code as we speak. Just continue the conversation.
All right,
When
so
I
that's
find
not,
it, I'll let you know.
right, you can just come back to me on that. That'd be
Yep.
So Alan, read a word.
Yes.
So this money, you want the Common Council to approve the use of this money for any kind of, investigation that you might have to do, but you don't want it to be a city official that might be involved in that ethical violation or alleged violation, right? And so you just need someone to approve you being able to use it. And you're muted. I can't hear you.
No. Okay. We don't need any real money, but we just need the ability to enter into an agreement with whoever. And it's seldom that we do that. I've in a couple iterations of the board, we've done it twice. Once was an attorney volunteered who worked for another municipality, volunteered and advised us. In his past time, Mr. Loventhal was contracted with. And in general, we use corporation counsel.
Okay.
But when there's nobody, when there's nobody left to go to, it's like, who do we go to?
Rennie, I'll come to you in one sec. So it seems to me that the Laws and Rules Committee, like, we would be okay to review any revisions that you want to make, but as far as the financial part of it, I'm thinking that would have to go through finance. Is that correct, Rennie or Dan?
For the budget, yeah.
I think that we can't do that from what Dan was just saying, that it needs to be a city official. So if there could be a way to authorize us to go to an alternate city official, even to get the approval.
Yeah, you can certainly, create language that, doesn't name this, city official and just says that the retainer agreement will, be executed by, an appropriate city official in accordance with, procurement and, budget rules. And, it would be addressed on a case-by-case basis. Again, you're talking about actually executing the retainer agreement. And, it's not really choosing the attorney or authorizing the expenditure of the money. It's approving the agreement that the ethics board would be negotiating and entering into with outside counsel.
What's the retainer agreement, Dan?
Yeah, retainer agreement is a legal document. It's a contract between the client and the attorney that outlines the scope of their representation, the manner of payment, and other legal requirements with regard to an attorney-client relationship. Technically, there's supposed to be a retainer agreement in any attorney-client relationship. That just outlines the scope of duties and responsibilities of both parties.
And we need a public official to do that.
You need a public official to execute it, to actually sign it, because it's committing the city to the expenditure of funds.
Is there any way we can give that power just to the board?
I don't see how you can do that. No, I don't see how within the procurement policy and the powers of city officials, how a appointed member of the ethics board can execute a contract obligating the city to make payment to an outside attorney.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Rennie, did you want to ask your question?
No, I think Dan addressed it. I think what we're just talking about here is how to clarify who to go to in what kind of cases, right? So I think we need to think that through a little bit. If there's possibility for someone who's not an elected official, but who's a paid city official, Dan Gartenstein, for example, mentioned the comptroller. I think it would behoove us to clarify in what kinds of situations the official that the board should go to, just so that, because we've seen this case before, it was unclear who they could go to and who had the power and authority, and it took weeks and months. Right. So, they want something pretty simple, which is, clarify the process so they don't have to try to reinvent this every time this kind of event comes up.
And the process is clarified for most cases. You go to the mayor unless the mayor is involved. And if he is, then if they are, then you would go to the alderman at large. So maybe language that if that happens, then you go to the majority leader, or and if they're involved also, then maybe you go to the comptroller.
Yeah.
And if they're all involved, then I don't know.
If they're all involved, then we probably should get new people.
I don't know what to say. And the other thing I want to say is that, we recognize the hard work that the employees do, the hard work that our elected officials do, and the officials on other boards. And we don't want, as the ethics board, to cast a cloud on anyone or particularly unnecessarily. And we don't want people to be afraid. We want people to be able to call the ethics board or call one of us and say, hey, this is going on. What do you think I should do? Or, would this be a violation? And we can't always give a concrete yes or no. And when it's close like that, you might want to lean towards the don't do it. But, but just to be a more open and transparent process, and the educational component, I think, is really important, that people get that training at employment and then annually. I inspect drug treatment programs around the country, and every year they have to do these things through some kind of reliance or competency-based training that they understand. So I don't think it would harm anyone who enters into employment with the city to understand what they're bound by ethically, more than just signing a piece of paper, if they do that.
Okay. Did anyone have any other questions or comments for Alan? No? Okay, so I think our action then is to think about this. Sounds like a line of succession that you're talking about here. And so the council would think about this and then get back to you. Is that?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, that's one of the issues. The other is to review the entire code and make sure it means what you want it to mean.
Right.
And then the education component and the financial disclosures.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm asking a whole bunch at once, but
You gave us some homework, Alan.
well, you're good at homework.
I'm good at giving it out.
Oh, yeah, that's what I know. It was one way or the other.
Okay, great. Well,
Well, thank you for listening to me, all of you.
Well, thank you for the presentation. We appreciate it. Thank you for your work as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay. I see his name. Maybe he stepped, there he is. Hi, John.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Hi. Okay. So I know that you sent us the attachments, the documents and everything, and you also sent a proposed resolution as well. But did you want to comment or kind of give us an overview of what you're looking for here?
Sure. Good evening. John Schulteis, city engineer. We have a project coming up at the wastewater treatment plant, and I've been before you for a couple items. One of the requirements we have to complete is the seeker process under the state Environmental Quality Review Act. And that's the purpose of my being here tonight. If you may recall, a couple months ago, I was before you to start the process, which allowed us to start what's called a coordinated review of the project with interested and involved agencies of state government, and we did that, and that process gives those agencies a chance to comment on the project and also a chance to comment on whether the City of Kingston Common Council should be what's called lead agency under seeker. So we've completed that process. There were no objections. So the purpose of my request tonight is twofold. First, to affirm that the Common Council is the lead agency for the purpose of seeker. And secondly, to make a finding of no significant environmental impact for the project. And so once again, just to give you a little background on the project, we have this project coming up to come into compliance with tighter pollutant limitations at the wastewater treatment plant. And there's two components to that. One has to do with the processes that are employed at the wastewater plant, and the second has to do with the piping that delivers the treated effluent to the Rondout Creek. And so really here tonight, for the purposes of this, the project is the portion in Rondout Creek, and a finding or affirmation that the Common Council is the lead agency under seeker for this project, and also a finding of no significant environmental impact. So I've provided some related documents and a committee report, which you might have requesting the two resolutions related to that.
I do. I have committee report. Resolution number 1 would be to affirm the city as lead agency under seeker. Resolution 2, make a negative declaration of environmental significance for the WWTP upgrades. And so with that, I'll call for a motion. Unless anyone has any questions. And then we'll call for a motion. Then Rennie?
I have a question, Rita.
Yes.
Hey, John. So the question is whether it's just for lead agency. No, it's not to discuss whether positive declaration, negative declaration, right?
Well, not exactly. We did that before to start the process. So, the first process that we did, I think 2 months ago now, was intent to declare lead agency. And that starts a coordinated review. Now we're having completed that, we are affirming, requesting that you affirm that the city is lead agency. Slight distinction, intent to be lead agency versus affirming that we are in fact, that the Common Council is the lead agency.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for John? No? Okay. So we'll call for the motion.
Motion.
Second.
Okay, motion. Patrick. Second by Rennie. All in favor?
Hey, can you read the
You want me to read it again?
committee report? Yes.
Sure. Okay. Resolution 1 will affirm the city as lead agency under seeker. Resolution number 2 will make a negative declaration of environmental significance for the WWTP upgrades project. Okay. So all in favor? Let's see. All right, so the motion is carried. Okay. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Have a good
John.
night. Thanks. Have a good night.
All right, so next on the agenda is the good cause eviction. And I believe Kevin Corte is here. Let me find him. Kevin, are you here? There you are.
Yes, good evening, Councilwoman.
Good evening. How are you?
Good, how are you all?
Good, good. So you have a presentation for us.
I do. I think I'm able to share my screen. Let me just double check. I might have to go through, get that permission.
Okay, I think Dee has to give that permission to you.
While we're waiting for that, Alan, if you're there, you're more than welcome to stay, but don't feel like, out of a sense of manners, you need to stay.
Thank you, Randy.
And with that, he's gone, or is he still there?
No, he's here.
So
I just made him a co-host, so
Okay.
Thank you. That
You're
seems to have
welcome.
worked. Okay. Skipping ahead here. All right, so I'll just go ahead and get started, and I'm sure there will be questions, and I can address them all as we're going along. This is pretty dense, but essentially, what is just cause eviction? It's in the simplest way, if anyone is going to be evicted from a unit in Kingston, if any tenant will be evicted, there needs to be a series of reasons why that is the case, and there's a limit to why that would happen. Good cause eviction sets out 9 different ways in which a tenant could possibly be evicted in the city of Kingston. In not necessarily order, but in order, some could be evicted, violating part of their tenancy. So if their tenancy specifically requires that their 1-bedroom apartment be occupied by no more than 2 inhabitants, and there are 8, people occupying the unit, that is a violation of one of their substantial obligations, and eviction proceedings may move forward. If the tenant is committing a nuisance, and that is reported through other, if it's a multifamily complex, if it's neighbors or anything else that can be considered a nuisance, that may also be grounds for eviction.
Kevin, should we ask
If
questions?
occupants, yes,
Should we ask
absolutely.
questions during this, interrupt, wait till you're done, or ask questions as you're going?
I'd prefer
No, I
to
think
hear
it's
the
great
whole,
to.
I prefer to hear the whole thing if that's okay, but that's just me.
Yeah, I think it makes sense for him to go through his presentation and then we have questions.
I'll be quick, and I'm happy to move back and forth on the slides. So keep some things in mind. And I probably don't have the answer, but I'm happy to give it a stab. So the third one is that the occupancy of the housing. If there's a crime being committed, obviously this is one of the causes for eviction. If the tenant is allowing for illegal activity to occur on the site, all these are pretty standard. If illegal activities are occurring, evictions may proceed. If a violation of an agreement is occurring, evictions may proceed. Moving on to the other kinds of, if there is, for example, a refusal on the tenant on multiple, if it's a bad faith effort on the tenant to prevent a landlord from going in and making repairs that are necessary for the maintenance of the building, or improvements that are required by law, if the building is found to be in violation of building and safety code, and the tenant makes a bad faith effort to refuse access to the landlord, that may be grounds for eviction. As well, if there is a need for a landlord to recover possession of a unit in a building that's limited in size, in this case it's 12 units, then that may be, if the landlord intends to use that as a personal residence, an eviction proceeding may move forward for that particular unit. And the same applies for all of the units if it's a small building. So if, for example, there is a multi-story house that is being reassembled into a single family dwelling, and that the owner of the building intends to occupy it as her primary residence, that is grounds for, that can be a legal reason for eviction for the tenants of those units. So those are kind of the simpler ones. Those are overarching reasons why someone could possibly be evicted. Then these two are a little.
You're breaking up, Kevin. Can't hear you. You're frozen.
Yeah.
Complicated, so I did I lose anyone?
Yeah,
I just heard something.
last minute or so you were couldn't hear anything.
Oh, probably my connection. Sorry. Am I back?
Yes.
Okay, so I was saying that this is a little more. The last two of these items included in this bill are slightly more complicated. In the past, if a landlord chooses not to renew a lease, a tenant has very limited recourse to stay in the unit. If a lease term has ended, then there is really no obligation for the landlord to renew that. This changes that. If a landlord intends not to renew a lease for whatever the reason may be, they must occupy the tenant 5 months in advance. And importantly, the tenant must consent to also not renewing the lease. So if a tenant does not consent to the lease not being renewed, that may be challenged in housing court, and that may be reason enough to judge to grant.
Frozen again.
We lost you, Kevin. I don't know. Does anyone have a number for Kevin? Maybe he can go out and come back in again.
Yeah, I don't have one. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I am reaching out to him now.
Okay. Well, I guess in the interim, until we,
Sorry, folks, I lost you all there for a minute.
Welcome back.
Okay, let me share this again. Thanks for bearing with me here. Okay, so I don't know how much of that got lost, but there was the item of consent of a tenant in terms of not renewing a lease. I'm not sure if you got all of that.
yep, that's where you left off.
Great. So if there is a just cause for that lease not being renewed, if the housing court does find that, then there needs to be another lease that has been entered with an arm's length transaction, so it cannot be with an immediate relative or someone close to the landlord. If an arm's length transaction of a new lease is occurring, then the tenant can be removed as part of the good cause eviction. And the last most complicated part of this is the tenant has failed to pay rent. Failing to pay your rent is cause for eviction, and good cause eviction under this new law, you would be allowed to evict someone who does not pay their rent, but there are several caveats to that. One of the biggest caveats to that is that if non-payment of rent occurs after a rent increase that is deemed unconscionable, non-payment of rent is not grounds for eviction. So what is an unconscionable increase in rent? As currently contemplated, the rate of increase is something that needs to be considered when determining whether or not an increase is unconscionable. And the tenant's ability to afford the increase is also taken into consideration. Any kinds of improvements that are made to the unit are taken into consideration. So if there have been massive capital improvements, if there have been decorative improvements, whatever the case may be, whatever justification the landlord may have for increasing the rent, that's something that needs to be considered when determining if, after failing to pay rent, that is cause for eviction for a tenant. Furthermore, there's significant market changes. Again, all of these are stacked on each other. So if a rate of increase, if the increase has occurred and a tenant has failed to pay rent and they are now in housing court, a judge will have to determine whether or not there have been significant factors, such as market changes, that make the increase unconscionable. The condition of the unit is also taken into consideration. And generally, if the rent has been increased in any calendar year by more than 5%, that's when the threshold occurs for you to need to go to the housing court to justify that increase. So an increase of less than 5% is generally not considered unconscionable. A determination of whether or not an increase is unconscionable can be made when the increase is of more than 5%. Those 9 items are the 9 different ways and the only 9 ways in which a tenant may be evicted in Kingston if this passes. So when it comes to eviction proceedings, this also changes some things slightly. And they really just kind of expand on the real property law that already exists in New York State. It basically just says that that there is relief against a landlord who makes fraudulent statements. So One of the reasons why we mentioned that a tenant could be evicted is if the landlord intends to occupy a unit for their personal residence, right? If during eviction proceedings it is discovered that the landlord has made that as a fraudulent statement, whatever fees a tenant paid to hire an attorney to prove that in housing court, those are now made, you are able to seek recovery of those fees as damages. That's a slight change in real property law as what it exists right now. Another thing that's very similar to that is you are able to grant a permanent stay on the warrant of eviction if there are, as long as you are meeting the procedural requirements to do so in housing court. So generally speaking now, if you are in housing proceedings, if you are in eviction court, you may still be evicted while your case is in housing court. This shall allow you more clearly to stay in residence while that case is being determined. And those are really the two big changes that it has to do with eviction proceedings, the two major parts of this law. So that was an incredible amount of information, and a lot of it is jargony and legalese, but the gist of the law is the following. If there is a increase of rent more than 5%, a landlord will basically have to justify that increase to a judge. So a judge in housing court will have to determine, if the tenant stops paying, whether or not that increase was unconscionable. And for the reasons I mentioned, a judge can determine whether or not that is the case. This does change a little bit. It doesn't really change with the fundamentals of whether you can back out of a lease. Again, the agreements that are made in executing a lease and who gets to sign a lease and all that are staying the same. But if a landlord breaks the lease, the landlord still has a duty, as has always been the case, to find a new tenant, make a good faith effort to find the new tenant for the remaining period of the lease. And if they are not able to do so, the tenant is still liable for the outstanding months the lease term would have extended. So it's just some of the questions that have come up as this has been passed, and that's not being affected in this case. So I'm sure that opens a series of questions. I'm happy to go back and forth on each of these slides. I know the mayor has also forwarded you some of the draft legislation that's been proposed with the edits. That legislation that you received mirrors very closely legislation that was passed in Albany recently, and it adapts it for use in our own code. So where to start?
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. All right, so I know, Don, you had some questions, although I
Right,
can't.
I don't know, am I on mute? I don't know, Rita, is this the discussion period, or are we asking
Well,
Kevin questions?
This is the question period for him in in relation to the presentation that he just gave.
Okay, so I'll ask a couple questions. I see Randy has a couple questions, or at least one. So Kevin, one of the things that I see here is the nuisance tenant, right? So someone that may harass their neighbors, or maybe they smoke, or maybe they yell out in the middle of the night, waking people up. And they couldn't be evicted, as I understand it, because well, they could, but the landlord has to go to court and prove it. So prove that this tenant was being harassing or rude or smoking or whatever he or she is doing. Is that correct? And then the court, and they have to make a case to the court to prove their case.
So similarly, this isn't affecting a lot of the things that already exist. So similarly, the way you'd have to do it now, there is a requirement for you to go to housing court to justify an eviction. So you would have to prove whether or not that's through police reports or other kinds of statements or affidavits, or however that would be the case. You would have to show a housing court judge that you are evicting this tenant for one of the reasons listed as a good cause under this bill. And that applies to all the causes that are included in this bill.
So then there's no, what's the change then with the nuisance tenant? You're saying it's the same as it always was?
That's not necessarily different. This is just considered one of the good cause evictions, right? What this did is just limited the scope of what is a reason for you to evict. Currently, right now, being a nuisance tenant is a cause to evict. And if you wanted to evict someone for being a nuisance tenant currently, you'd have to go to housing court and prove that. This is the same there. This is one of the causes that it considers as a good cause for eviction. All this law does is just it limits the scope for what can be used as a good cause to evict tenants. So as of right now, you currently have to go to a housing court if you tend to evict someone and get an order that you are allowed to evict because of the tenant is causing a nuisance. That's unchanging in this. You would continue to do so.
Okay, and then the notion of unconscionable rent increase. What if I buy a property and it's not in good shape? It has tenants in it. And, and so I want to change the windows, fix the roof. You said that now you have to go to a judge to agree whether the improvements you're making justify the rent increase. And the judge could decide no, or it's too much. Is that right?
That's right. So one of the factors that's included in the judge's determination on whether an increase is unconscionable is the condition of the unit. And that includes both the unit itself and common areas. That also takes in consideration the improvements made to the subject unit, but it also takes into consideration the rate of increase relative to the tenant's ability to afford the increase. So a judge may find, yes, these repairs were necessary, and yes, there have been improvements that have been made, but this tenant is unable to pay the increase that you have proposed, more than 5%, a 15% increase is too large for a tenant to afford. And although you can demonstrate that those changes have been, or that the increase is in relation to improvements that you made to the property, if the judge determines that the tenant cannot afford that increase, a judge may decide that that increase is unconscionable. And any rent that a tenant has failed to pay is no longer cause for eviction.
And then so the landlord is just stuck with his tenant theoretically indefinitely.
Unless the tenant meets one of the other 8 criteria outlined in the good cause eviction law. The only way you can evict a tenant is one of these 9 different items. These are the 9 good causes for eviction, and that's it.
Rennie?
Thanks. So Kevin, if a landlord or a housing provider did increase the rent above 5% and justified it to the satisfaction of tenants, that case would not automatically go to a judge, right? The tenants would have to bring a case to the judge.
They would have to, so the timeline of events is an increase is made in rent. And whether or not the tenants agree with that increase of rent is separate to this consideration in this matter. So if an increase in rent is made in a multiplex and half the tenants start paying the increase, which is 20%, then nothing goes before a judge and everything continues as normal. But if the other half of tenants stop paying their rent and the landlord begins eviction proceedings and attempts to evict the tenants that are not paying the rent, that's when those eviction cases would go up before a housing court judge, and the judge would determine, yes, it was okay for those tenants not to pay rent, and therefore, no, it is not a reason for you to evict them because the increase was unconscionable, or no, it was not okay for the tenants to not pay rent. The increase was conscionable and the tenants should be evicted and you have the right to evict them.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's
not
right.
until
So I'm
you
just
get to
saying-
the eviction proceedings does
I'm
the
just trying to
question come in front of the
clarify
judge.
Tenants have some agency in this process of taking an issue to the judge. They don't necessarily have to. They can agree. So in the case that Don pointed out, if a landlord says, hey, we need new boilers and I'm going to have to increase your rent by 8%, and look, here are the numbers, and the tenants agree and say, oh, yeah, that looks fine, we'll agree to that. Then that case doesn't, I'm just trying to make it clear that the case does not automatically in every instance go to a court, that there has to be some agency on the part of the tenants to take the case to court.
That's right. But generally that would happen on the landlord side. So what the tenants would do is stop paying the rent,
Mhm.
and the landlord would then have to move to evict them in order for this case to be taken to housing court.
Gotcha. Okay, right.
And then when I'm in court, it sounds like the judge is going to make a decision, but that assumes that the judge understands the cost of a boiler or on replacement windows or new electrical service and how much those things cost and should cost and and the judge is deciding on the other side, whether a tenant has the ability to pay or not. Isn't that giving the judge, isn't that putting your so much obligation, so much on the judge to sort out?
It certainly increases the determinations that a judge would make in housing court. So presumably the landlord would have to have legal representation to make the case that the increase was conscionable if they expect the increase to stick, and if they would like to evict tenants that have not paid rent after an increase in rent of more than 5%.
Right.
There's also a question I have about contracts, because in some cases, a lease is a contract, but yet in some cases, these contracts are sort of thrown out. It's like if the tenant makes a case, well, I'm not paying rent, they're breaking the contract, and the judge could uphold their reasons for not paying. So in effect, this is potentially making a contract null and void. True?
I think that's one of the things that will come up if this legislation or Albany's legislation is brought to the Supreme Court. Currently, as contemplated, yes. So in the past, a breach of a lease, i.e. non-payment of rent, is considered a breach of contract, and the contract is therefore null and void. And then you can move to evict, and that's been used as a justification for eviction. This would then say, well, non-payment of rent is not necessarily a breach of contract if the non-payment of rent occurs after an unconscionable increase in rent. That's what this is changing. It does change that dynamic.
So Kevin, then isn't this in effect saying that there are reasonable ways to increase rent? There are reasonable expectations that tenants should have when they sign a contract, and that one of those expectations is some stability in having a home. Is that correct?
It certainly says that anytime the increase is more than 5%, they have a right to not necessarily appeal the increase directly with the tenant or the landlord, which they always have, and that kind of relationship doesn't necessarily have to change this. It just says that it's not automatic that when you stop paying rent after an increase of rent of more than 5%, that is grounds for eviction, that you may be allowed to stay in your unit if you fail to pay rent after an increase of greater than 5%.
And I'm not, in terms of the accumulation of 5% over time, if a landlord increased a tenant's rent by 5% each year, wouldn't that mean a doubling of the rent over about, 14 years?
Adjusting for inflation, I think it would be closer to about 30 or 40 years.
Adjusting for inflation, so at 2%, you mean?
Yeah, something like that. So if you would take the increase of 5% and then take out the 2 or 3%, then you'd effectively increase rent about 2% every year. So after 10 years, you'd have 20% increase, and then as you moved on, you'd get closer to doubling the rent.
Mm-hmm. And then assuming that a landlord does make improvements, that would also bring that rate up, that doubling quicker than the 30 or 40 years you mentioned.
Right, but considering that if it happens over the course of 1 year, anytime a rent is increased more than 5%, then there's the possibility for that to be unconscionable, and that's for the housing court judge to decide.
Right. Thank you.
Don, did you have
Hi, I
any?
have a quick question.
Who is saying hi?
I'm one of the callers for Zoom.
No.
No.
Great. So we're not taking questions from the public. You can do any written comments or, you can do an email to our city clerk, and that will go on the record. Or you can contact your representative, your ward representative with that question, and we can make sure that it's disseminated the correct way. So were there any other questions from any of the committee members?
I have
Alderman
a
O'Rourke?
question, Rita.
Sure.
Thank you for being here. Very interesting. Now, when you sign a lease, right, for an apartment to rent, you could sign that lease for, let's say, 1 year lease or a 5-year lease or a 99-year lease. Now, when you sign that lease in good faith, after let's say it's a 1-year lease, after 1 year, your lease is up, and the owner of the building, the actual owner of the building, could say, okay, lease is up. Thank you very much. I don't feel like renting you this property any longer. I'm going to make it into storage. Now, they own the property. They made the lease with you for that 1 year. Are you saying that that lease isn't binding, and that the owner now, after the 1 year lease, could now be held to continue renting the space they no longer want to space indefinitely, forever?
I think ultimately, yes, that's something that would have to be determined in housing court by the judge. But a simple refusal to want to renew the lease is not cause for eviction. So you can't, for example, purchase a unit, have a 1 year lease term, and then at the end of that 1 year lease term say, okay, that was it, and you're no longer allowed to be here. This would change that. And I don't think it's indefinite, but yes, a tenant would then have recourse to avoid eviction in housing court.
So if I just have a space I want to rent, I'm thinking about the housing crisis. This almost sounds like it might create its own housing crisis. So I'm thinking about a space I want to rent for a year, and that's it. And you're saying, don't do it, because you may have to rent that space forever.
As currently contemplated, I mean, it's unlikely, but yes, that is possibility under this, that once you enter into a good faith agreement and the tenant signs a 1 year lease, if you choose not to renew that lease and a tenant does not consent to that, yes, you could effectively be required to offer a renewal of that lease, or they could be granted a stay for their warrant of eviction.
So the contract doesn't matter.
And hence, I would say that would be the opposite of what we're trying to do, is which increase the housing stock. I would imagine many people would be deterred by that and not want to be a landlord for even a short period of time or a longer period of time, or even 5 years, because they know now that they may not be able to break that. They may not be able to do what they want with their own property. The government has now taken over their property, and they no longer have the power of deciding what to do with their own property. That sounds not like something that would be pro housing. It actually sounds the opposite. Are you sure this is to help our housing stock in the city of Kingston, or to decrease it?
Kevin,
Was that a question for me? Sorry.
Yeah, don't you think that this may decrease the housing stock in Kingston?
I think right now I'm only giving I have the bill that was presented in the legislation that I'm trying to introduce, and I'm here to clarify any kind of confusion about what the bill says. But as to my opinion on what the effects will be, I think we'll have to, maybe have a conversation in a non-public forum.
Well, who thinks it's going to increase the housing stock? Who's proposing this legislation that thinks it's actually going to be a positive?
You can look and see that on the communication, Patrick.
I believe the actual legislation was introduced by the mayor.
Okay, so
And was co-signed by 5 members of the Common Council.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like this is the opposite of, trying to get people to, change their homes into rentals, or even build a rental on their property, or for any outside developers to even come into our city. Is there any kind of number of units that you're putting this on? Or is it the mom and pop now who want to rent out the second half of their house, and they own a 2-family, and you're saying they lease it to somebody next door for a year, and now that they may have to lease that property for years and years to come?
That would be for the housing court judge to determine if the
No,
renewal of the
there's
lease
specific
is
numbers.
entered in good faith. But you need to have a certain size of a unit in order for you to be into this.
Certain
Right.
number. of
Sorry?
units. There has to be a certain number of units. It has to be 2 or above. So the
Oh,
case
so-
you gave, Patrick, is not correct.
Oh, so
If you
it's
have
2 or above
two-
units?
2 units or more, as currently contemplated, yes.
Oh, so if you own 2 units or more, then this is in effect. If you only own 1 unit, it's not in effect?
Correct.
So that's correct. So if you have a duplex, for example, and you owner occupy one side of the duplex, this is not in effect for you.
Okay.
So, and Patrick, I don't know if you got a copy of the actual legislation, but all of that is in there. Rennie?
So Kevin, in the last couple of years, I know you're a recent transplant here. Welcome. But from your understanding, have we not seen some significant increases in rent that are pushing this 5% limit on a yearly lease in the last couple of years?
Yeah, currently, there is no limit to yearly increases. So there have definitely been increases larger than 5% for lots of units in Kingston.
And have you heard, like I have, from lots of people around town who've lost their units, who've lost their homes of many years because of these large rent increases?
Yeah, currently, again, if you choose not to, what's happening is lots of landlords are choosing not to renew their lease with an existing tenant, an existing long-term tenant. And those leases are ending, and they're choosing to take that time to renovate the units or make other kind of cosmetic or structural improvements, and then put them back on the market at significantly higher rates.
And so we've actually seen a fair number of people leaving Kingston who are the hardworking folks at the lower end of the income scale, who tend to work in places like the service industry. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think the total census population is in decline, not only for the city of Kingston, but also all of Ulster County.
So these rising rent increases have actually caused people to leave and lose their homes.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the recent increases in rents have definitely driven some folks further and further afield to look for more affordable housing.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions? Don, Pat?
Let's enter into discussion, I think.
All right, so thank you, Kevin.
Thank you all. I'll stick on if you have anything that comes up, but I'll stop sharing the screen now.
Okay, great. So I'll call for a motion to enter in discussion on the good cause eviction.
I move that we adopt this legislation on good cause eviction.
Let's discuss first.
No, you don't discuss first. You have to have a motion and a second before you can
Well,
discuss.
We'll make the motion to adopt first and then go forward. So I'm sorry, Rennie, can you just say that one more time for me?
I move that we adopt the good cause eviction legislation that's before us.
I don't understand the protocol here, Rita. I thought first you discussed something before moving
We
ahead
have
with
to
it.
move, we have to move to adopt it first and get it
Adopt-
second. And then we
adopt-
can motion to discuss.
No, you have a motion and a second. That allows for discussion. At the end of that, then you can have a vote. At the end of discussion. This is how we've been doing it.
So we have a motion on the floor to adopt the legislation. Do I have a second? I will second it. So motion made by Rennie, seconded by Rita Worthington. And now we will call for discussion. Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor? I'm sorry. Rennie, you're muted, Rennie. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, so no, you're right, Rita. We discuss now, and then when people, are finished discussing or somebody wants to call the vote, we can do that. But this is the time for discussion.
Okay. So we will discuss it. And Don, I think I saw your hand up first.
Okay, thanks, Rita. This is Don Tollerman. So I own a three-family house over on St. James Street. And I have to tell you, this proposed legislation makes me tremble. With this legislation, I would never want to buy another property again, because these restrictions make it so that that if I have any problems with my tenants, I have to spend money on lawyers. I have to go to a court. I have to make a case before a judge, and hope that they, and expect the judge to understand, the realities of a landlord. The Central Hudson price is going up, the price of windows, everything's going up. And so, if I make a case to my tenants to say, hey, I've got to pay, put a new roof on, and it's going to cost $20,000. And they say 20,000, I could do that for 5,000. Is it really the kind of conversations that I'm going to want to get into with trying to convince my tenants that I need to make capital improvements and raise the rent to pay for it, and depend on a judge to also understand the prices of things and approve whether I can raise the rent. The notion of unconscionable rent increase, unconscionable more than 5%. If I needed to buy a new refrigerator and an oven and a dishwasher, let's just say that costs, in $1,000 apartment, right? They're paying $1,000 a month. So if I have to buy some new appliances for all that stuff, it could easily cost $2,000. And if 5% on $1,000 rent is $50. So I can't raise the rent more than $50. So if I take $2,000 and divide it by $50, that can take 40 months just to pay for those appliances. Forget about all the other things that have to be paid for. And it's also the risk, because there's a risk that the judge will say no. Judge will say, sorry, Don, this tenant can't afford it. They are on a fixed income and they can't afford it. So the effect will be, I won't want to make any improvements, because why would I make an improvement if I'm going to be told possibly that I can't increase the rent more than $50? I'll be losing money every month. So this tells me that I shouldn't be investing. It tells me a few things. Number one, I shouldn't be creating any more housing, as one point. Another point, if I'm a owner and I'm looking to create housing in Kingston, and this law exists, I will run the other way as fast as I can. I'll go to North Carolina or many other markets where, I can not have this fear of a forever tenant. Really, a tenant, who's to say what is an unconscionable raise in their increase. So I really think that this will kill our housing market. I think that anybody who owns a multifamily building, this immediately makes it worth less. I think that, time and again, we hear people in our city pounding the table saying, we need more housing here. We need more housing. This is the opposite. This will have the opposite effect. Nobody's going to want to build housing here if there's all this risk. And Randy, I want to say something to what you said. You said, well, these rental increases over the last couple of years have made people lose their homes and had people move. And that, I hate, that's true, and it's awful and it's horrible. but why should that fall on the landlord, the owner of the building, the housing provider? I mean, yes, it's a terrible situation, but is it for the owner of a multifamily home to be the role of the government? I mean, shouldn't the government be stepping? I don't know. I don't know the answer, Rennie, and I hear you. It's not pretty that people can't afford their homes and have to move. But wow, let me tell you, if it's up to owners to support this this system, owners are going to be running the opposite direction.
Go ahead, Rennie.
Not true, I think. We've already gotten a letter from a person who owns 3 rental homes in Kingston, Sarah Franklin. She sent you a letter saying precisely the opposite, saying that she's in favor of this legislation. The reason she's in favor of it is because what it does is it sets out clear guidelines for everyone involved. What it does is it balances the playing field between those who provide homes and those who need homes. Because of the huge rent increases, because of some of the unconscionable practices we've seen, we've experienced a large outflux of people, particularly at the low end of the income scale. We don't want to end up being like a place like San Francisco or even places lower down closer to the city, where the rents have increased and increased and increased, and they've priced out the people who do a lot of the work. And then you end up with people having to travel for hours to get to their jobs. Look, the problem right now is that our laws are unclear. All Kingston tenants live in a precarious condition. They can lose their homes in the blink of an eye. Landlord just has, on a whim, can say, "No, not you anymore." So they face the possibility of eviction for lots of different reasons, or losing their home for or no reasons at all that they can tell. So this common sense, I think this is common sense legislation, because it provides these reasonable guidelines that'll clarify the relations between tenants and landlords. And then in those cases where there's a conflict, you have a mediator. And I'm sorry to hear you have such a bad opinion of New York State judges, but I think they do a lot of work weighing precisely these kinds of issues. The problem right now is there is no mediator. And the person who has all the power is the landlord, the person who owns the property. We also want a town that's humane so that people who have homes can keep those homes. You have to find a balance. And I think it's really important to remember that housing providers have a grave responsibility that sets them apart from the people who sell trinkets and tchotchkes. They have a service of providing not just a house, but a home. And this legislation ensures that tenants can feel confident that so long as they do their duty as renters, they will be secure in their homes. And that's the crucial thing here for me, is that this is allowing for some confidence for the people who rent, as well as reasonable rent increases, reasonable expectations for the people who own the properties.
Yeah. And let me just make a comment as well. And Don, I hear what you're saying. I see both sides of the equation, but I also understand that, evictions, for not any cause at all. It's not, it's a cause. It's not it's an effect on poverty. It causes poverty, generational impacts on kids and disrupts educational things. You always have to look at, the big picture of what this is going to cause. And, we're trying to give tenants some stability, and we're hoping that this legislation, it's not going to have a negative effect, but it will invest in neighborhoods and increase family stability and enable, development without displacement. This legislation just calls and says that you cannot just evict a tenant because you just want to. There has to be good reason to do so. And I just think that's fair.
I think if we're looking at the big picture, Rita, the really big picture, I understand what you're saying. And, yes, we do need stability in our families, and that's very important. And we do need that. But we also need housing in the city of Kingston. A guy like Don, who has a 3-bedroom, you know what they're going to do with that thing, Rita? They're going to turn it back into a 1. into a 3-bedroom apartment, they're going to turn it back into a 1-unit unit or a 2-unit unit so they can get around this law. There's going to be less housing, and that's going to happen again and again and again. You have to remember, when you're giving rights to someone, you can't take away rights from someone else. The landlord is an owner of a property. They have property rights. This is their property. They shouldn't have to have a forever tenant in their property just because they want to do the right thing and rent out an apartment for a year. So now what we're saying is, okay, you make an agreement. Look, I want to move into this apartment for 2-3 years. We make a lease, but now you're saying the landlord, after 3 years, you're saying, no, you have to do it for 4 years. No, you have to do it for 5 years. You have to do it for 6 years. Or you have to do this at only 5% increase for 20, 30, 40 years, as our advisor there told us. It might be 30 years of increases that you are unsustainable. Are the landlords going to take care of their homes? Are they going to take care of their homes with small increases in rent? Are they going to be able to care for their homes? Are our neighborhoods going to deteriorate because now we have landlords that can't really keep up with the cost of building supplies and building materials because now they're restricted to just 5% a year. There's all sorts of other things that can happen too. And one of the things that's going to definitely happen, Rita, is housing stock is going to go down. Developers not going to come in. They're not going to want to be in our city. People like Don are going to close up shop, and they're going to make their places back into 1-family homes, 2-family homes to get around this legislation. So what, in fact, this legislation is going to do, which is affecting property rights of people who own property. You're saying they don't have property rights. Once we enact this law, we're saying, oh, you own a property? You don't have the right to that property. We have that right to tell you what to do with that property. So, I mean, if you have, we also have to say on our own conscience, are we gonna say to ourselves, we're gonna tell other people what to do with their piece of property, and tell them how to manage it, and for how long? Forever, maybe even. We may have to bind them into some kind of legal contract that they have to go on with a lease forever. This is nothing any kind of business person is going to want to get involved in. Anybody who has any kind of financial ideas about renting in the city of Kingston is going, like Don said, they're going to run. So I think, Rita, and Rennie, I think the opposite of what the big picture is, really big picture is, you're going to scare off anybody who wants to be a landlord in the city of Kingston.
Go ahead, Rennie.
Sorry, I don't think you're correct, Patrick. When we held our housing hearings 2 years ago, we had 3 different people who own houses in Kingston, all who testified saying that they weren't concerned about profits. They were concerned about having good long-term tenants. The other thing is that, remember what zoning is? Zoning is how we tell people what they can do with their property. Government is here to try to find a proper balance between the people who provide housing and the people who need housing. So this argument about property as if it's somehow, this, pristine right is just off base. We tell people exactly how they can use their property. In my neighborhood here, you cannot open a business in your property. The government is telling you, you can't do that. Why? There's no real good reason for it. That's just the way that they set up the law a long time ago for some political reasons. We tell people a huge amount of what they can do with their property. The problem is right now, the people who have all the power in the landlord-tenant relationship are the landlords. This law is trying to redress that by, number one, providing some balance, some reasonable balance. It's not just a 5% increase. It allows for larger increases. What it's saying is that somebody who wants to increase the rent, who's in an affected unit, who has an affected building, has to just explain why that's reasonable. And that is then bringing in the judge as a mediator. Because right now, there's very little mediation that can occur between a tenant and a landlord. So this particular bill allows for profits. It doesn't say that you can only increase the rent by the cost of living increases, by inflation. It allows for increases above inflation. And it also says if for some reason inflation increased by 10%, that would be a reason for a landlord, property owner, to be able to increase rents above 5%. In other words, it's flexible. That's the crucial thing here. Unlike older kinds of laws, it's flexible. So what we're looking for here is a way to find a balance so that tenants have a way to redress bad landlords, not good ones, but a way to redress bad landlords when they act improperly, illegally, unconscionably, and inhumanely. We're trying to protect people who have homes, not just property owners, but the people who have homes. I've got people who've called me who've had rental units for 30 years, and now their landlord is increasing their rent 10, 15, 20%, and they have to move out. Why? Those people have a long history in their home, and now because somebody's trying to make a greedy profit, that person has to leave. And a lot of times, because they lived in a home for a good long time, they're elderly, and it makes it much more difficult for them to have to try to find a new place to live. Then in the environment we're in right now, the rents have gone up all over the place. So what do they end up happening? They end up being homeless. They end up having to find some very low rent kind of place to live. It's not fair. It's not right. You have to have some balance between the person who rents and the person who owns. And that's what this law is asking for.
I agree, Rennie, but it's going too far. When you tell a person that their personal property is you may not ever be able to get rid of a tenant. That's gone too far, Rennie. You can't do that and expect people to become landlords. You can't tell a person that, oh, this is your property. And now that you've rented it to one person and made a 1-year lease, you may never, ever be able to get rid of that person if there's a judge that doesn't believe that should happen. This is their personal property. And now this just goes too far, Rennie. It goes too far.
I have a housing provider here in Kingston who owns multiple properties just texted me and says, tell Patrick I'll buy any building he doesn't want. The business model of a housing provider is not the same as selling trinkets. The model and initial price
I
set
thought we weren't
must
letting
take
outside
into
people make
account the
comments,
people
Randy.
whose
Now you're
loves you're
Now
providing
you're
housing
letting
to.
comments happen.
Okay.
I'm letting you know that there are housing providers in Kingston who disagree with what you're saying.
Oh, I'm
Housing
sure there
providers.
are. I'm sure there are. But I'm sure there's a ton that agree that, like Don, who are saying this is untenable.
And that's the choice you make. Either you side with the property owners who are greedy, who don't want to be reasonable, or you
All
side with
property
the
owners
folks
aren't
who want to
greedy.
balance.
Yeah, I have to say.
Wait,
Rennie,
hold on, because I'm chairing this meeting. So let's take a step back and let's be respectful. So I need one person to speak at a time. Okay, so Patrick, you certainly are allowed to respond to what Rennie said to you, and then Don, you can go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I don't know what happened to me. Something happened to me. Oh, here we go. Rennie, I mean, you act like all property owners are greedy. That's not true. All landlords are greedy. That's not true. Look, you can't have these non-negotiable leases. That's what a lease is. A lease is a legal document between two people that agree that you can use my property for a little while, but not forever. But now you're saying, oh, no, that shouldn't be. It should be, if you make one agreement with a person, that property could be now caught up in legal battles forever. That's not right, Rennie. Come on. You know better.
Rennie?
Number one, Patrick, I did not say all housing providers are greedy. As a matter of fact, I just read you from one who was not. What I said is that there are greedy landlords. There are people, and we've seen this recently when E&M Management was here in town. We saw what they did to ruin a facility by unconscionable rent increases, forcing people into month-to-month rents. That's the sort of thing that we're trying to avoid. That's what this legislation avoids. So the lease is still negotiable. And the point is that it provides for a reasonable negotiation that gives some balance to the tenant that the tenant does not have now. And it tries to find the right balance. Plus, if we find that 5% is a little too low, we can always adjust it to 6%. We have the power to change this and to be flexible in terms of the actual conditions that we see resulting from this legislation. This is not going to be cast in stone forever and ever. We have the power to be flexible and to listen to the system as it responds to legislation like this.
Yeah, and keep in mind.
Can't hear you, Rita. Can't hear you, Rita.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Now you can.
Okay. I don't know if you heard what I said. I said good landlords already abide by what is good cause to evict tenants. So we're talking about bad actors here, not good landlords. With that, Don, are you there?
Yeah, Rita, you're onto something there. I mean, there's a presumption here that landlords have just been evicting people for no reason, which is not true. Landlords don't evict people unless there's a problem, or they want to take control of their own property. And I object also, Rennie. You do characterize these owners as villains and greedy. You're buying into a narrative that is out there that is harmful. I guess I want to share with you what this means to me personally with my little 3-family on St. James Street. Any tenant now going forward, I will make sure that they are so financially solid and have such great references. My standards for any tenant now is going to be so high, and I don't want it to be that way. I want to make room for someone who's not making all that much money, or maybe they're a musician, or maybe they're an artist, but I have no room anymore for any kind of, risk. I'm going to have to, in my little property, I'm going to have to be just, and that's terrible because I'll be excluding worthy people. And, yes, Randy, I'm sure you have spoken to people landlords, housing providers who are in favor of this. I am very tied into the real estate community here, and I have spoken to a dozen people who own multiple properties who think that this is just a terrible idea. So, I am clearly not in favor of this.
What do you say to that, Rennie?
I've spoken to scores and scores of people who live in their homes who have lost their homes. I've spoken to many people who've cried as I spoke to them because somebody has raised their rent to an unconscionable level or has kept them in horrible conditions so that they can, force them out of the house. And I am absolutely not saying all housing providers are greedy. I'm saying that some of them are, and we've seen it. We have clear examples, and I gave you one, E&M Management. And so what we're talking about is trying to find balance. Some people may not like it, but as my experience in this case has been that some people, when they think of these things, they foresee something that's worse than actually comes about. The crucial thing I said too is that we have flexibility here. We start off with this rate, 5%. We start off with this way of trying to create negotiations. It may be that we figure out that what we really need instead of going to court is that we need mediators. We need trained mediators. The city might could hire housing mediators to work between tenants and landlords. We're just not sure at this point, but we do know that there are too many people in Kingston who are suffering because the rents are high, because they have a difficulty feeling like they can stay in their homes, knowing that a landlord can move them out very quickly by simply raising the rent to a really high level, which is a de facto eviction. Absolutely. If somebody is not living up to the law, a landlord has the right to evict that person. That's what this law says. And it clarifies what those situations are. If a tenant is doing illegal activities, absolutely, a housing provider should have the power to move that person out. What we're trying to do is find a balance, and we have to start somewhere. And this seems to me like a reasonable place to start.
You know, I think Don has an excellent point there. You know, we all want stability for people in our community. Of course we do. And we all want, you know, people to have a place to live and a reasonable place to live. That's true. Now let's just consider what Don said there for a minute. He's a landlord. Now, what this legislation is going to do is he may have a tenant for many, many years to come now that he didn't want. So now he's going to raise his standards and maybe even income level when he checks their credit scores and things like that, which I know which landlords are able to do. And isn't that going to eliminate a lot of the people you're talking about, the service industry people that will not be able to meet these standards any longer of landlords in our town? And again, won't this be absolutely doing the opposite of what you want to do? Lowering our housing stock, making our housing stock more gentrified with people who only can afford it. This seems to be the absolute opposite of what you're trying to do. Or maybe you're not trying to do it. Maybe you're not trying to increase housing stock. Because if you are, then you'd make it more favorable for landlords. You'd make it more favorable for developers to come in. And what would happen then is that as our housing stock went up, which this is not going to do, as our housing stock goes up, of course, competition will be less, prices will come down, and then you'll have affordable housing in the city of Kingston. What you're doing is causing landlords to run away, housing stock to decrease, prices to go up, and the opposite of actually what you want to happening in our city. This could be more tragic than you realize.
I keep hearing all or nothing terms, Patrick. Some landlords may make the same kind of decision that Don is talking about, absolutely. But I have evidence, I have lots of people I've talked to who would make exactly the opposite decision. What we're trying to do is to develop a fair housing market so that the people who are renters have some power that they don't have now, that they have some power to control the maintenance, the stability of their homes. And like I said, we always have the power to alter this in the future. And so if we see that the rate of 5% is too low, too high, whatever, we have the power to work on that and change it. We can collect data and find out what's going on and see what's happening. What we do know is that too many people are losing their homes now in the current market that we have, in the current way that we have, because some landlords can use the de facto eviction of a significant rent increase. We saw this happen over here on Green Street. Landlords started increasing rents huge amounts for lots of folks. And what choice did they have? They couldn't pay the rent anymore. What this law says is that that landlord can still increase the rents, and that there are reasonable ways that that landlord can do it, especially if the landlord is facing certain kinds of costs, replacing the roof, replacing the boilers and whatnot. So I think that this is simply a reasonable response to provide balance between the landlords and tenants, and a balance that we don't have now.
You're saying that every time a landlord puts a roof on a house a boiler in the basement, a refrigerator in the apartment, they may have to go to court with a lawyer. That's what you're saying, Rennie. You're saying that they may have to go to court with a lawyer because they're going to have to raise the rent more than 5% maybe, because they're improving their property. They're doing the right thing for the neighborhood, improving their property, making the housing stable for future generations, putting a new roof on it, putting a new boiler in, doing the right thing. And then they may be, in order to do that, they may have to go in front of a judge every single time with lawyers and everything else. It's going to cost. That cost is going to be put off onto the tenants. The prices are, well, I guess maybe it won't be put off onto the tenants. It'll be put back off onto the landlord again. The cost of, so I don't see where a landlord thinks that I don't see where the landlord thinks this is going to be a good thing if they are going to constantly be having to go to court with a lawyer to put a new roof on, to put things on. Now, like you said, the tenants may agree to a 10% increase, but why would they when the law says only 5%? They might as well go to court. And by the way, when they're in court, they can't get evicted. So why not go to court and then drag it out or whatever, as long as they can, so that they can't get evicted. So what's going to happen, Rennie, is I think the opposite of what you're saying.
Yep. I hear you think it's the opposite. I think that we need a balance. That's all.
Don?
Yeah, I think Patrick is right on this one, but you know, I have a suggestion that you know, it seems we're 4 people here with 2 votes one way or 2 votes the other way. Why not have a public hearing? Is that something worth considering? So we can hear from developers, we can hear from tenants.
Well, if you remember, we did a lot of meetings. The housing committee was put together where they heard.
Right, but this is addressing a specific law, though. That was, you know, this is a little different.
Well, we haven't passed this as a law yet. We're just.
I know. I'm suggesting in advance, maybe we bring this to the public for their input.
No.
Why
And
not?
it's always, you know, it's always within the authority of the council to call a public hearing with regard to a proposal. Listening to all of you, there are 2 votes on either side. So, I mean, action can't be taken this evening because there aren't going to be 3 votes either way. You know, so, I mean, the proposal that Don has put out there certainly is a path forward, and it gives, everyone the opportunity to be heard other than the 4 people in this.
That is something that the council would have to decide on, whether they want to do that or not. Yes, the full council. So,
So I have a point of order question for Dan then.
Yes.
Sorry, Dan. So you're saying if there were 3 people here, 5 people, and we had a 3-2 vote in favor, it would go to the full council. If we had a 2-3 vote or a 3-2 vote against, it would go to the full council. But if it's a 2-2 vote, it does not go to the full council?
Correct, because you don't have a majority in favor of either a positive or negative recommendation with regard to the legislation.
So what is our path forward then to get this to the full council? Are you saying that this dies?
No, I think what we could do is, given what Dan's saying, that we can't have a vote to send the legislation to the full council. But what we could do is, if we all agree that there should be a public hearing, we could make a motion to call for a public hearing and then get the president to schedule that. And Dan, would that require a vote of the full council, or can we just ask the president of the Common Council to set up a public hearing?
No, laws and rules can have its own public hearing.
Okay, so we could do that then.
So if there are 3 votes tonight to schedule a public hearing, You can take that vote, you can schedule it, and, you can hear from the public prior to next month's Laws and Rules meeting and revisit it after, you hear opinions on both sides presented by the public.
Okay.
So then, so do I hear a motion on the floor to schedule a public hearing, to have public comment, and then move forward?
Yep. I make the motion.
Motion by Rennie. Do I have a second? Second by Don. All in favor? All right, that's 4-9. All right, and so that's what we'll do. So do you want me to contact President and ask her to schedule that public hearing, and then we'll go from there? I'll do that
Yes,
tomorrow.
please. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So we move to old business on the agenda. So we have the Sojourner Truth Day Proclamation. I think Susan Herrick from the YMCA is here to answer any questions that we might have. Are you here, Susan?
I'm here, but actually Ani and Alishani and Brianna are going to take the lead on this.
Okay. Okay, hi, ladies.
Hi, yes. Good
right.
evening. My name is Ani Castillo. Thanks for putting Sojourner Truth back on your agenda. So during the Laws and Rules meeting in the month of July, I believe, my peer Jessica Alonso presented the Sojourner Truth Proclamation to have a Sojourner Truth Day here in Kingston. The day would be November 26th, 2021. We had a Sojourner Truth Day last year, November 26th, 2020. And so when she presented the proclamation, I believe there was just the language that she used, she was asked to change some of it. And so I believe you all have the updated draft that was created. And so, yeah, we're here to answer any questions and to see if you approve of the new proclamation.
So did everyone get a copy of the revised language?
That's what was included in the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't find the original one. So I wonder, Ani or Shani or Brianna, if one of you or all of you could just give us a couple of hints about what the changes were.
Yeah, unfortunately, Jessica is back at, she's at Skidmore right now. And I don't have the original proclamation, but I do remember that, let's see, the third to last paragraph, I believe that she was very broad in the sentence that was written and said that the Kingston government had not been committed to anti-racism or had shown that they weren't anti-racist through their actions and their policies.
Right, that was the gist of it. It labeled the Kingston government as not having reflected a commitment to anti-racism. And so we thought that statement was a bit broad, and the revised language just revises it, and it says, in the past, although not all elected officials serving Kingston are responsible, there have been policies and inactions from local government that have not reflected a commitment to anti-racism. So that's the change.
Okay. Great, thank you. Yeah, that was the part that I remember being at issue. So that's much better. It's much more nuanced. I appreciate that.
Right. Don?
So I'm reading it, and I want to just put the suggestion out there. I'm going to read the last sentence that you're referring. I'm going to read the paragraph. Whereas the values that Sojourner Truth live by, such as abolitionism and anti-racism, are the values that we hope the Kingston community including the local government, reflect in their actions, period. The next sentence, I wonder whether we need it. It says, in the past, although not all elected officials serving Kingston are responsible, there have been policies and inactions from local government that have not reflected a commitment to anti-racism. Do we need, that's sort of just saying, hey, that's kind of admitting that we were bad, and maybe that's part of your intention here. I want to know, but that is sort of like, slapping the face of people. And I wonder whether that's entirely necessary.
Okay. Bree, do you want to comment on this? You're muted.
Thank you. I would say that we feel it's needed because as a part of our mission on being anti-racist, it's important to reflect back on our past and to take accountability for where we may have failed or not, been at our best. And Sojourner Truth was all about truth. And I feel like in order for us to move forward, it's important that we reflect on where we kind of fell short in the past. That way, in the future, we know how we can further, change our actions. And so I think the accountability part is super important, and not to, slap anybody in the face or throw shots at anybody, but just so that we can take accountability as in ourselves and also as a community and also for our government too.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Ready?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'll make a comment when we talk. I'm sorry.
Okay. Anything else, ladies?
No, I believe that if there aren't any other questions, then that's the proclamation we have.
Okay. So let me say first, thank you for, taking the time to revise the language. We appreciate that because that lets us know that you're willing to work with us as well. And I'm fine with the revised language and I understand the accountability part of it. So I'm fine with that. And I think we should go ahead and move forward with this. Ready?
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize accountability as well. And I like the way that you all have phrased this because it clearly says that there have been incidents in the past, and we're talking about a very long history here in Kingston. There have clearly been actions that the Kingston city government has taken in the past that were not based on equity or fairness, and that have resulted in discrimination against people of color and other groups as well. So I think that this is a necessary part. Accountability requires some admission of wrongdoing. It's not a slap in anybody's face. It's simply saying, we now understand that certain actions were inappropriate and had bad outcomes in the past, and we'd like to atone for that. We'd like to make up for that by holding up Sojourner Truth as a model for the kind of person that we all strive to be here in the present.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. First of all, I'd like to just say I agree with what Rennie just said. And I'm curious what you envision for the day. So it's make it a Sojourner Truth Day. Do you envision public events? Do you have a plan for something, or is that something you'll talk about later?
No, we have had some things in the works, and I mentioned before last year we were able to observe Sojourner Truth. It did fall on Thanksgiving, so not much attention was given to it. But the people who knew about it and were aware and were absorbing that day as Sojourner Truth. My peers and I, Brianna and Alishani, we've been working with other people in the community to have a list of actions that people can do to honor Sojourner Truth on that day, whether it's reading books that will educate you more about her, visiting statues that are near here, whether that's the one in Port Ewan or the one in Highland, and just taking the day to reflect on who Sojourner Truth was and what that means for you. I think especially for women of color like myself, Brianna and Alishani, Sojourner Truth is a role model and inspiration that, you know, we are capable of a lot of things. And so all of this will be posted on our social media, and we will be promoting that day with a list of actions that people can take if they would like to honor Sojourner Truth Day.
Well, that's great. I applaud you guys for coming back and being responsive here, and I applaud your efforts, and I think it's awesome. And you know, look forward to the day and being there with you.
Thank you very much.
Great. So then I guess the action tonight is just to, for the Kingston Common Council to proclaim November 26th as Sojourner Truth Day in the city of Kingston. Yes,
Are you calling for the vote?
I'm calling for the vote. For motion.
Motion.
Motion by Don. Second. I don't know who went up first, Patrick or Rennie. So Patrick, I will give it to you. How about that, Patrick? Second. All in favor? All right, wonderful. So moved. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies.
Are you all clear what happens next?
Sorry?
Are you all clear what happens next about the process here with the Common Council?
I mean, you could definitely explain it if you'd like.
Okay, so we're just a committee. So in essence, we vetted it to say, is it worthy to go to the Common Council? What's our opinion about it? All right, so you got a 4-0 vote here, but the real vote is at the Common Council. Okay, and so that'll take place on October, is it 5th? Whatever that Tuesday is, next Tuesday. Okay, so if you've got folks who you know who will support this, there will be a period of public comment at the beginning. So that meeting starts at 7:30 on that Tuesday. So if there are folks, if you all want to come and explain it again, you know, say the reasons for it, that's a more public venue. And in that period of time, anybody can speak. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank
All
you.
right. And with that, we will move to our last item on the agenda. This is the accessory dwelling unit legislation. This was, we had spoken about this a few meetings ago, and so this is back on the agenda again. And so we need to decide how we're going to proceed on this legislation.
Was there any change or development there, or is this just what's been going
I'm
on?
thinking this is the original legislation that was brought forward to us, because I haven't seen any revisions or changes.
I'd say we just leave it on old business.
Yeah. Anybody want to, any other comments on this? I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure how to proceed on it.
I think just leave it on old business. Let Jeffrey deal with it when he comes back.
There you go. I'm all in favor of that. Okay, and so that was the last item on the agenda, and I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn. Motion by Rennie, second by Patrick, and we are all in favor. We are adjourned.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
All right, have a good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.